On today's episode, we'll talk about getting your first film job in a bar, that single shot episode of The Bear, eighth grade, Chicago Fire, Jupiter Ascending, and of course, learning how to operate the camera on your first job as a camera operator. Just a little bit of business before we start. There may be a curse word here or there in this episode, so please listen responsibly. As always, our website, theop.io, is up and chock full of tips, tricks, and gooey operator goodness. Make sure to check out The Breakdown, where the best operators in the biz explain shots they have done, The Musings, where we discuss everything from quick tips to larger concepts of storytelling, the answers, the images, and so much more. I may or I may not take a break or two during this episode, but I promise that none of them will be longer than 22 seconds. Finally, if you are enjoying the podcast, please follow us, write a review, share us with your parents, and talk us up around the water cooler with your friends. So grab a beverage, sit back, and enjoy the op. Thanks for listening.
Lock it up, nice and quiet, and let's roll.
Rolling. Victor 30 Echo, take 2.
Hey, Margaret. Hey, Mark.
And camera set. And action.
Hello and welcome back to the Op Podcast, the podcast where we talk about operating and the art of visual storytelling. I am Dave Comides, your host, and I'm coming to you from I think the basement. Maybe this is a rec room. It's like a rec room in Prospect Heights, Illinois. I have a very good friend and a great operator on the show today, Gary Malouf. Gary and I have worked together a couple of times. Some of the things that he's worked on are a TV show you may have heard of called The Bear, which seems to be something that people watch. Chicago Fire, The Map of Tiny Perfect Things, eighth grade, Justified, and The Shy, both of which we worked on together. And an upcoming movie called Sweethearts, which should be out sometime in the near future. Gary, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Wait, no, thanks for having me. You're here.
Well, thanks for coming to me, so I didn't have to leave my house. Yeah, this is the most convenient
I would have
podcast experience
I
I've
would
had.
have had you at my place, but the L runs by every like 30 minutes, and that would have sucked. Are we in the rec room or the basement? What is this?
You know, this is actually used to be my grandpa's like workroom.
Oh, this
And,
was. Oh, that's
yeah,
very cool.
and so my very talented wife turned it into like kind of what I would consider like she calls it the wine cellar, but
It
it's kind
totally
of
is the
like
wine
the speakeasy kind of hangout space.
It's really cool.
Yeah,
And
it's
now it's
become
the
a popular room.
It's the
Yeah.
podcast headquarters now. And if you hear that clicking, because the heat just turned on, so you probably hear clicking in the background.
Yeah,
So,
we're by the utilities.
So tell me your story. How'd you get here?
You know, God, who knows, really? I mean, I got my first job in a bar.
No way.
That's a true story.
Wait, you get your first film job in a bar?
Yeah, yeah. I coached. There's a gentleman that lives not far from here named Vince Gaffney, who owns a production company and does like a lot of commercial work in town. And I coached this kid in baseball, and I ran into him in a bar, and he
You
was
ran
like,
into the guy, Vince. in
into
the bar.
Vince at a
Yeah.
bar, and you know, I was like probably in my last year of film school at DePaul and was coaching baseball on the side, working
Okay.
at a restaurant, like, you know, just doing the college thing.
Yep.
And yeah, you know, he's just like, oh, I never really got to know you other than baseball. What's your deal? And I told him, I'm like, hey, I go to film school. You know, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm figuring it out. And he goes, oh, you want a job? I own a production company. And I said, sure. And then sorry, Vince, but I lied to you right through my teeth and told you I knew everything about 5Ds and when I didn't know what any of that stuff was. And
That's great. So wait, what do you make like commercials and stuff? Like
yeah,
local
yeah,
stuff?
and they were just, you know, like I think the thing the first job I did was a CLR commercial,
What's
which is
CLR?
calcium line rust. It's like a cleaner, you know.
How
And
everybody starts out.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And you know, it was like non-union stuff, but it was like, you know, he had a good thing going on, and it was he was very nice to me, and he
What'd
goes,
you do on that commercial?
well, you meet the DP at
Yeah.
Schumacher Camera
Okay.
at 9 o'clock on Monday, and this is like a Saturday afternoon, and I'm like, okay, sure, great. And I'm thinking like in my brain, you know, like my idea of a DP is like, you know, older guy with like the glasses around the
Yeah.
nose, and
Yeah.
like just like my ignorant idea of what a DP is back then. And up walked 26-year-old Andrew Wade, who I still work
Oh my
with.
gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was
His name's going to come back a number of times.
yeah, and
That's amazing.
that was who it was with, and he was just getting started, and it was just kind of like total luck.
So,
I would love to tell you I'm really smart and talented, but yeah.
So you basically, anybody listening to this, hang out at the right bar.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're set.
Yeah, coach the right kids.
Coach the right kid, yeah,
Yeah.
and then hang out at the
Yeah.
right bar. But so were you like assisting? I mean, obviously you weren't
Yeah.
a camera assistant per se, but like you were like helping with gear and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was basically his glorified camera PA because
Okay.
it was like he was kind of a one-man band at the
Yeah.
time, and you know it was he had actually done like I don't want to butcher his origin story, so he can yell at me later if he listens
There
to
you
this.
go.
But he had been doing like fashion photography and stuff, and he had been doing pretty good at that out of school, and I think he kind of like got to the point where he's like, you know, I got in this to be a cinematographer. I
Yeah.
should start trying to do that.
Yeah.
So he basically just, you know, dropped everything and changed course and started
Wow.
as like kind of the jack of all trades, like during that 5D revolution. And he's such a smart guy. He just knew everything and like really did the research and started owning his own gear and like was in on that
Cool.
from the time I knew him or met him.
Well, and wait, so when is this that you met him?
This is like 15 years ago, probably.
wow,
So this
okay.
is probably like 2009, yeah, 9,
And
10.
you were still at DePaul, or you
Yeah,
finished? Okay, you're
yeah.
still at DePaul. Wow.
And he had just left, so like we kind of bonded over the fact that he had gone to film school at DePaul
Okay.
and had left the year before I got there, so
Yeah.
we never crossed paths. And then yeah, I just kind of was basically his camera PA. I mean, I didn't know anything, you know. So he was like, "Go charge these batteries," and I'm Mr. like gung ho, like, "You got it." And then I came back 10 minutes later and be like, "I don't know how any of this works." And
That's
so
great.
he was very nice to like me enough to keep me around
Yeah.
and kind of show me the ropes. And we worked together for, you know, back then. And as I left school, he got me a job at Schumacher, so I learned all the gear
That's a
working at
rental house, I'm assuming.
Schumacher.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
Ace. Now no longer with us, rental house, but kind of like a Chicago staple place that like a lot of like really good assistants that I learned from went through there.
Okay.
It's kind of one of those places where you're like, wow, you work there too? You work there too? Like everybody
It's
kind
like
of
a rite
went
of
through there.
passage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was like, especially for my era and the era, couple eras before me. So it's kind of like a nice little,
That's cool.
you know, story that we all share together. And it was a great place to learn because they were like kind of the mom and pop rental place, but like, you know, they had all the gear and they serviced like mostly commercial work and stuff like that. But it was like a very nice place to learn because a lot of times it was just downtime where you were just maintaining all the gear. And,
Yeah, sure.
And the head tech there was a guy named Mike Acuna, who's one of the nicest dudes on the planet. And he was just like so knowledgeable and he taught me everything about shimming lenses and doing all that good stuff.
Wow.
And like, so I just became really knowledgeable about the gear just through that.
And then were you still working with Andrew like when he would
Yeah,
have stuff
so like
going?
I was definitely kind of doing that game and you know he was getting you know getting more and more kind of recognized in town and like he was very smart. He definitely is like the king of fake it till you make it because like he had like this website that like when I looked him up I was like, dude, this guy is killing it, and I found out they were all spec spots. And
So it's like Nike. And
yeah, but he was
Adidas.
doing really great work and stuff. But like everybody kind of
Yeah.
realized that he was talented and kept giving him shots, and he kept doing
That's
great. And I
great.
just, I mean, quite honestly, rode his coattails for as long as I could.
Yeah.
And then he got in the union to do I think it was like a U.S. bank job. That was like a bigger job. And I think I might have joined shortly thereafter to keep working with him.
Mhm.
And then like it kind of happened where Chicago became really busy around that time.
Yeah.
And again, another stroke of luck. Like I got called to day play on Chicago Fire,
Okay.
and I thought they were talking about the soccer team. And I was
But
like,
you still took the job. You were like,
oh yeah, I was just
run
like, you got
midfield.
it, I'll do whatever.
I'll do
Yeah.
whatever.
And I got there and I ended up working for the first that I worked for was actually Chris Dame, who's the B camera operator.
You
at
were
the Bear.
seconding?
I
Oh.
was a utility.
You were utility. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And so that kind of came up through that kind of day playing thing. And then the first job I got that was big was Jupiter Ascending, which John Toll shot. And I
Oh,
was
yeah.
the utility on that. And I was horrified the entire time, just like,
Wow.
because it was like, you know, I was kind of super green.
Yeah.
and I'm not kind of. And I like to say that I think I probably survived by the skin of my teeth on that job.
Was that just like the Chicago portion, or the whole thing was
The
shot
whole
here?
thing was. I think there was a London portion too, but I mean,
Okay.
it was like a summer.
Do you remember who the
It's like
operator was, or
the
operators?
operator was Daniele Massachusetts, was A camera.
Uh-huh.
B camera was the local Chicago guy named Ferris Anderson
Okay.
Sakia, and then there was a third camera operator. It was Kim Marks, was the
Oh,
C
Kim
camera
Marks. Yeah,
guy,
yeah, yeah.
and he was like the second unit DP,
Okay.
I believe, if I remember
What'd you
correctly.
think of working with John Toll? He's amazing, right?
Dude, I mean, and I got to hang out with him a lot just because I was the guy that was responsible for his image.
Sure.
So, like, I heard all the stories, and like, he's just the funny guy and like so relaxed. And like,
He has the greatest stories.
yeah, and I was just lucky to just stand by him.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
he's
And
also like the nicest person.
yeah,
And because I interviewed him early on and I'd never met him. And
yeah,
it's funny because if you listen to the interview, the first couple of minutes are really sort of like wooden because he takes a little bit to sort of like
sure,
get going. And I was sort of, I think I was overwhelmed by
yeah,
like, this is John Toll. And then once I like lightened up and he opened up and it was just like, oh my God, the stuff that flowed out of him. Like,
yeah.
what a career. It's an
Well,
absolute
yeah,
amazing.
and I mean, and I was like kind of at that point too, where like I was so not tapped into the world, the filmmaking community
Yeah, yeah.
yet. I was so on the outside of it.
Okay.
So like I kind of like slowly realized,
Did
as
you know how big he was going into it, or did you
I
think?
knew it was a big job. I knew
Yeah,
the Wachowskis were a big deal because,
yeah.
like, the Matrix and the whole nine, and like Chris Whittenborn, who
Oh, sure.
was the B camera second on that show,
Okay.
and so he's always he was like very very good to me when I was coming up, and trained me and looked
Yeah.
out for me and all that stuff, and he's a great guy. But he was the one that was kind of just like slowly being like, "Hey, you know who that is,
Because
right?"
Chris is like
Yeah.
really into the
Well, and
film
he's
world, and
just
yeah,
yeah, and he's
he
just
totally would
he's
know that.
knows
Yeah,
what's going on,
yeah,
as I
yeah.
did not at the time.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Oh, I had no idea.
And
That's
so I kind
wild.
of like slowly learned where it's just like, oh, I'm here. I didn't know that I was here. And yeah, so it's quite the experience. And I mean, just watching everybody work and just kind of like, and Dave Cousins was A camera first, Sasha Jones was A camera second, and they were from the UK, and they were like, the big timers that came into town, and like
Yeah,
just watching them every day and just realizing like all these little things that I kind of knew about from a distance, but like watching them do it for the first time was like, oh wow, like every person out here is an artist.
yeah.
Like I
Oh
didn't
wow,
realize
really?
how serious every part of this is, and like it really was the eye-opening experience for me where I was just like, oh, I was hooked before, but now
So
I'm
was that
hooked.
really the first quote unquote like fully professional thing you
Oh,
did?
for sure. Yeah, that and as
At that,
a
yeah,
everyday guy,
yeah.
full time, yeah, for sure.
That's wild.
And it was just like definitely eye-opening.
It's a little
And
different than Chicago Fire.
oh yeah, and as the Chicago Fire, like I had been out there as like a day player where you're just kind of like in the chaos. You're just a body, move this, move that,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
everything's so chaotic. And that was you're there for a day or two and you're out, so you don't really have so much time to absorb everything.
Uh-huh.
And just being there day in and day out with them, and like just the logistics of it, and the trucks moving, and everything that goes along with being an assistant, and then
That's cool.
hanging with all these great operators and these great firsts, and
Yeah.
like seeing all these people work together, and like there's movie stars here, and like it was just like that thing where it was just like it took me a couple weeks where I was just like, oh huh, I didn't realize that this was this big a deal.
This is
I was
like
just
the
trying
show.
not to screw up. Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah, it's like getting called in the major leagues, but like you don't really know that it's the
Yeah, but
major
from like the
leagues.
T-ball team.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
exactly.
sure. That's how I felt.
Oh, that's great.
So it was great.
How long was that job?
I mean, I don't, God, who knows? I mean, we probably, it was like, it felt like it was all summer.
So like a
Yeah, it
couple
was a couple
months.
months,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And we did nights for a few weeks, and it was just like I kind of felt like it throughout that job, I kind of like got all the experience in one
I'll
show that
bet.
I hadn't gotten yet,
Yeah,
where it was like, we're gonna do nights for 3 weeks, and you're gonna know what that's like. And then
yeah,
we're gonna go work in a cornfield for a week. You're gonna know what that's like. Now we're on the armory that's like it's all green screen, and we're in space for a
yeah,
couple weeks,
yeah.
and like all that stuff. We're in
Wow.
fancy, you can't put this here or this here in this mansion that we're going to shoot in, and all the stuff that I had never
Yeah.
come across.
Wow.
I was like the guy that was doing the smaller stuff that was just pretty contained,
For
and
sure.
yeah.
That's amazing.
And so it was one of those things where like it really did change everything for me moving forward, because the B camera first on that job was a local named Dean Simon, who was another first that had done much bigger jobs, and he was Clint Eastwood's guy for a while, and he had like done you know what I mean, he had done all this big stuff, and he was kind of trying to crew up for a show that was happening after Jupiter was finished, and I just was again happened to just be there. And they're like, we're looking for a second. You want to be the B camera second? And I was like, you know, Mr. like gung ho, like, yeah, I'd do anything to do that. Yeah, of course.
A second what?
Second, yeah, I'm totally. And Dean was like, yeah, I bet you'd do anything for this job.
Did you know what? I mean, did you know what you were doing as a second? By the
Yeah,
way?
I had kind of started like to like fill in for people as
Okay.
a second during the course of Jupiter, and like
Yeah.
I think they kind of saw that I at least was like paying attention
Yeah,
and
and
you know like
willing to learn and all
yeah,
that
and I
stuff.
think
Yeah.
that there was at least like some kind of you thought amongst the people out there, especially the Chicago guys that were just like, okay, this kid might be okay,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
At
Well,
least he can hustle, if
yeah,
nothing
exactly,
else.
you know. So it's like he has
Yeah.
somewhat of a brain, you
And
know.
what was that job?
And then we ended up doing a TV show called Mind Games
Oh yeah.
that I had done the pilot for, and they brought me in like last second, like as a C camera second. So I had been doing second work, but like on the big job, you know, I was only a utility,
Yeah.
like because I couldn't hang with guys like Chris and them. I was nowhere near them.
Yeah, yeah.
Not even in this. They were playing a different sport, and and you know, and so I remember going out on that job and being like, wow, I'm way over my head out here, you know. And then by the time I got to be the B guy on Mind Games, I was just like, okay, I think I have a much better grasp of
Yeah.
what's expected of me, and
Yeah,
like
at least you know what you're supposed to do if you can't, even if you can't do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I ended up my first was Sean Moe, and my operator was Chris Duskin.
Oh, I was gonna ask you, Chris Tuscan and Sean Moe. That's a great group, right
and like
there.
so I had just come off of working with all those guys on Jupiter Ascending, and then going into that, and like you know, I kind of like must have done like they'll make fun of me because like I was not good.
Oh, they do, by the way.
Oh, I'm sure. And I was not good, and they knew it, but they were nice, and they definitely like helped me and got me good.
Yeah,
You know, and it was like such an interesting thing because like now not only was I kind of like got another side of it where like these guys are like there are like filmmakers and film workers, and like these guys are filmmakers.
Yeah.
Like these guys think differently, these guys are talking about story
Oh,
constantly.
yeah.
These guys are locked into like not only just the technical like what it takes to get the job done, but also like making sure that it's told correctly
Yeah.
and all that stuff. And like just watching them have like that confidence and that kind of approach was just like the second bit of eye-opening thing for me where I was just like, oh, okay, like, and then on next thing you know, it's like we're trying to stump movie references, and then like I'm going home with like the list of like 20 movies where they're like, you haven't seen that? And they're like, okay, you have homework. They're like, you have to go home and watch all these movies.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
was like, okay.
Oh,
you know.
that's great.
And
Boy, what you couldn't pick two better people to learn from. I mean,
oh,
just-
I mean, and again, it was one of those things where it was just like, how could I have known? They, you know, I got hired through the local first.
yeah, right.
And then he goes, yeah, you'll be with these guys, Sean and Chris. And I'm like, okay, cool, Sean and Chris,
Yeah,
whoever
yeah,
that
yeah,
is,
yeah.
you know.
Oh, that's
And
amazing.
and then I totally just lucked out. And then they liked, again, similar to Drew, they just must have liked me enough to not fire me.
Yeah.
And, you know, I ended up learning a great deal from them. And I mean, I've gotten advice from both of those guys during that show that I still think about to this day. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. And it's just, they just had you could tell that they had the flight time. That was really
Totally.
I mean, the best lesson I learned from those guys is that it's just like, just keep at it, keep working, keep trying to work with better and better people. And every story they had was about, oh, this is why I worked for this guy and worked for this guy, and I
Yep.
learned this from him and this from her, and it was just like, oh wow, like
Yeah, they're both
that's it, that's the work.
they're both
Is-
fantastic. And well, Chris Tuscan, like socially, I've crossed paths with, but I haven't worked with him in a long time. I think we used to work together on Nip Tuck, but
Yeah.
Sean Moe and I have worked together a bunch. Unfortunately, it's been a little while just because he's in Atlanta all the time now and whatever.
Yeah.
But we still keep in touch.
I like to
They're
joke
both
with
great.
him that I might have to become a superhero to work with him again.
Yeah, he's like
Yeah.
Mr. Marvel. It's true. It's absolutely true. But yeah, they're both. That's amazing. So, how long did you do that show for?
That show was probably like 7 months or something
So
like
you had
that.
time to really like,
But enough
like,
time
lean
for us to
into it.
really like kind of get to know each other, and really like them to take me under their wings.
That's
for
great.
sure. And like I, you know, became good friends with those guys, and I still am. And like they're just, you know, it was one of those
Yeah.
things where I just got lucky again. I mean, I couldn't have asked for two better people to meet at that time too.
Yeah.
Just
Well, it's the right people, right time. And I just like the idea that them like talking about a movie and looking at you going, "What, you haven't seen? Okay, go watch this weekend, and then we're going to talk about it." Because I
yeah,
could
but then
totally
also
see
me
them
like
doing
thinking
it.
like I know stuff, and I'd be like, oh, well, what about this movie? And they'd be like, I worked on that, and I was just like, oh, cool. So I have no chance of like being cool around you guys ever.
That's fantastic. That's great. Oh, that's so great. So basically, by the time you came out of that, were you sort of an established, not established, but I mean, like you could second, like you felt like you could do the
I
job?
definitely felt like after that I knew how to I was ready to do it.
Yeah.
I was ready to really get good at
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I had gotten to the point where like if that felt like I honestly that like year right there of just like starting and getting in the union, starting dating playing on the shows in town and the bigger commercials and then going through Jupiter and Mind Games like really I felt like was my film school.
Totally.
Like
Yeah.
that's where I really found my place and like I needed to be on set. I wanted, because like I was like thinking I was going to be a writer or maybe I'd be an editor and I did some other stuff
Really?
before I got into it and I just none of it really was for
Wow.
me. And I was quite honestly getting to the point where I was just like, well, I definitely can coach baseball forever, and I'll be fine.
And that got me a
And
job, but somewhere else. So maybe I'll get another job somewhere
and then I
else.
just, and then I just happened, like I said, it just happened to meet the right people at the right
Yeah.
time. And then they kind of helped me find my place where I was like, now this is like what I thought this is what I was looking for when I
Yeah.
decided to go to film school,
Yeah.
just being a part of it.
And did a lot of what you learned in film school end up translating and helping you, do you think?
I think that it was more about, I think I learned all the things that I screwed up in film school, if that makes sense.
What do you mean?
Like I think my approach of just like what it was going to take,
Oh,
and I
okay.
just think like I was the stereotypical like I'm gonna be a director, you know what I mean, and like had no real concept of like what that meant,
Yep.
and like I think it opened my eyes to the fact that it was, and this is something that I think Drew did in film school, which is the real luck would have been meeting him a year earlier,
Right. Yeah.
because he was the one that I think knew that it was like, oh, you have to know everything about everything.
Yeah.
You just have to immerse yourself in the process of this.
It's true.
And that was something that I hadn't gotten
Yeah.
to myself.
Gotcha.
And once I got there on set, it was just like, okay, then I started to fall in love with the process and fall in love with the
Yep.
like, what is the fastest way to lay marks and what is the fastest way to like, and just start to do
Constantly
all
improving.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like somebody, honestly, I don't even remember who told me this advice, but it was early on. And it was like one of like like the guys that were like almost at retirement when I kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
joined.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they just told me, they're like, only be told once and get better at something. Learn, it was only get told once and learn something new every day. And if you can't do that, get better at something you already knew.
That's great advice.
And I was
actually.
just kind of like,
Yeah.
kept that as my mantra
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a while as a second, where it was just kind of like that attitude.
No, I like that. That's actually very succinct, but it's absolutely right. Because the thing is, you don't always learn something new. So if you don't learn something new, you go, okay, I'm going to hone.
How can we refine
Yeah,
something
and
else?
I've actually talked to people about this before, and they go, look, you take all sorts of jobs for all sorts of reasons, and sometimes you take a job that isn't very challenging or very good or whatever, just because whatever it's you want to work in Hawaii or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But then and on those you just go, okay, I'm gonna focus on landing my frames perfectly, or I'm gonna
Yeah.
it's not some highfalutin I'm gonna be the best storyteller in the world, because it's not happening on
Yeah.
this. So you find something to hone. But that's great advice and very succinct. I like that.
Yeah, and I think it always just kind of for me helped to like give me something to focus on every day, other
Yeah.
than like everything else that's going on around you on
Yeah.
a film set. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, all the chaos.
Yeah, and so that kind of helped me from hopefully not losing my shit too much.
So how long did you second for?
I seconded then pretty much from that was probably 2013, and then 8th grade we shot in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So I seconded for a good like 5 years or so, or
And
full on.
eighth grade you operated on.
8th grade I operated on, and I dabbled in pulling focus a little. And you got to remember too, like it seems like this like meteoric rise, but it's definitely not. It's very much like like the town got busy,
Yeah.
and so like people were getting opportunities because
They
town's
weren't
busy.
available.
Yeah. And so I definitely got thrown into the fire you know, no pun intended, but like when I went on to, you know, those shows like Chicago Fire, which was really great for me, and I can't, you know, be more thankful for being there because I was there for 6 years,
Oh, wow.
but it was just the place to get the flight time and like work 10 months a year and make a living
Yep.
and just be able to like be in a space where like you can kind of just like keep getting better, keep
Yeah.
getting more and more comfortable. And
you were utility and then a second
I
thing?
started there as like a day playing utility, and
Yeah.
and then season 5 was my first full season.
Yeah.
And then I did 5 through 10. Yeah,
Yeah.
so 5 years, whatever it
Yeah.
was.
Look, TV is an amazing way to learn because it's
Yeah.
just repetitive. It's over and over and over, and
Yeah.
you just get better and better and better. The key is that hopefully you don't get stuck in that repetitive nature and you can break out of it somehow.
Yeah, well, if I got to give all the credit in the world to Drew because I had kind of started pulling focus like on second units, and I had pulled focus for him on some commercials, and I had pulled focus for him on an indie feature, probably around that same time as Mind Games was.
Mhm.
And so, you know, and I was terrible. I was not a great focus puller, and I knew it too.
Yeah.
And like people were like, I couldn't tell if people were lying to me or just not watching the shots. You know what I mean? Because they're like, "Oh, you're great. You want to pull focus next week?" And I was like, "Are you
Are
guys?
you paying attention?
Are you
I
sure?"
love it.
And so, well, he calls me and he goes, "Hey, I got this movie that Bo Burnham is going to direct," and it was with Chris Storer, who does The Bear. He was producing it,
Oh, wow.
and we had known, but you know, Chris and Drew, I've known since I've met Chris pretty much right after I met Drew.
Oh, wow.
It's because him and Chris had known each other already, and they were like doing like stuff for Funny or Die, and
Okay.
then we actually did a documentary on Thomas Keller and the French Laundry, just the three of us.
Wow.
That we went out there, and I was like, you know, again, this is like pre Jupiter Ascending, so I'm just like winging it.
Yeah.
And we go to just hang out with Thomas Keller and his entire restaurant group for a week, and it was like the most incredible
Oh my
experience.
gosh.
Yeah, like it ruined me moving forward with food. I was totally like, you know, the $5 slice and a pop guy.
Yeah.
And then like I came home and I told Kelly, my wife, I was like, everything's different now. Like
Yeah.
we can't.
Like clean out the fridge.
Yeah.
We're going.
Thomas Keller told
Top
me.
shelf.
Thomas Keller told me that the most offensive thing you could ever do is burn a piece of bread, and now like my life is ruined.
That's pretty funny. So Chris Storer he has some sort of food connection in general.
Yeah, I
then,
think
it sounds like.
he just always admired those people, and his sister is a chef, and she's
Oh,
the
that's right, you told
culinary
me that,
producer
yeah.
on The Bear.
On The Bear. Yeah.
And she
Chris is the executive producer of The Bear for people who don't know.
creator,
Yeah,
writer,
creator, yeah,
yes,
exactly.
overall,
Yeah.
yes, the man that made it happen.
Yep.
But yeah, I think he just always had an affinity for them and just really appreciated what they did. And I think he probably thought that he could be a chef, but became a director instead.
That's amazing though that the three of you go back that far and
Yeah.
have stayed together.
It was just, and
Oh,
you
great.
know, and it was kind of like on and off, you know, we kind of just did
Yeah, of
the
course.
weave around each other for years. And, you know, Chris and Drew had always stayed in touch, and, you know, and Chris was always such a, you know, he always just seemed like this nice guy from LA that was always doing cool stuff. Like that's how I knew him back then.
Yeah.
And so whenever he was around, it was just like, hell yeah, Chris is back. I love
There's
working with
something
that
cool
guy.
going
Yeah.
on. Oh, that's
And so and then Drew gave me the call. He's like, hey, we're gonna do this thing. And they had done a couple of Bo Burnham's comedy specials. So that's how
Okay.
they knew him.
great.
And then they hired Drew to be the DP of 8th grade.
Uh-huh.
And he said, hey, do you want to go do the smoothie with me? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I got a job here on Chicago Fire. And
Okay.
like, I don't really like pulling focus. And he's like, oh, I don't want you to pull focus. I want you to operate. And
Oh
I was
my
just
God.
like, why?
And you never operated before.
Never. And I'm like, why? And he's just like, well, I don't think I can do it anymore. He's like, I think I need to actually
Be a DP.
focus
Yeah,
on
yeah,
being,
yeah.
and you
Was
know,
this his first feature?
and this
like,
was his
big
first
feature?
like real, you know,
Yeah.
for sure. And so I was like, yeah, I'm like, I would love to. And like I got the month off or whatever it was from Chicago Fire to go do this. They were really nice about that. And then I remember leaving for New York and telling Kelly, I was like, I might be right back. Because they're gonna see right through me.
Don't start any projects. That's hysterical.
And I made it. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, wait, don't gloss over this. So your first day on set as an operator when you've never operated
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
I mean, have you literally never operated before?
Never.
Never operated before. So what
I
was
think
it?
I did like one like static handheld shot on like
Okay.
a Blackhawks thing
And
once.
Chris is not directing this, he's producing it.
He's one of the producers,
So it's
yeah,
a different,
executive
it's not
producer.
even like the director is your friend.
No, I had never met Bo
Okay.
before that,
Yeah.
but I knew that they had a working relationship with him. But it was his first movie as well.
Okay, well, there's something good there.
Yeah.
And Andrew's got your back, obviously,
Yeah.
but only to a certain point. It's like if you can't
Oh,
keep someone's
sure.
head in frame, he's only going
Sure.
to go
And
so
I
far.
also was like super nervous about like having to put him in that position.
Yeah, sure,
You know what I mean? Where I
And
was
did
just
you
like,
have like qualified assistants and stuff?
oh
for
yeah,
these?
Pat Soakley was my first,
Okay.
and Sarah Mae Gunther was my second.
So was that
And-
weird to go, you people really know your job and I've never done this before?
No, I knew Pat because Pat's from Chicago,
Yeah.
and so I had seconded with Pat, and Pat was like one of those guys that just like I don't know if Pat had like he seemed like he joined the union when he was like 12, you know. So like when I met him, he was like 21, and he was already like an elder statesman.
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
I hear you. Yeah.
And so but then he had moved to New York, and Drew's like, hey, do you know any assistants that work in New York? And I'm like, I know one.
Yep.
And he was around, and he said
well, that's
yes.
great. So he probably helped you immensely.
Yeah, and
right?
I don't know if he'll admit to this. So we were driving home after the first week because I was going to stay with him in the city because we were shooting like Hudson River Valley, like Suffern County area in New York, and I went home to stay with him for the weekend after the first week, and it was only like a 3-day week. And he said, he's like, hey man, he's like, I thought you were gonna suck. And I was just like, me too.
So then, but then did you then go? So what do you think now?
Well, I was just like, I'm glad to hear that I still think I do. So it's good to know that you had like, you know, you've been around some incredible operators. So like, he knows what's good.
Oh, that's great.
And so like, he just hearing that from him, it was just kind of like, okay, I'll at least survive.
Yeah.
You know.
But I don't want to let you off the hook. What was the first day like?
Oh, I mean, terrifying for sure. And I kind of had gotten to the point with like, I knew like how a set was run.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm just going to lean into that. I'm just going to lean into the fact that like, I know how to like do a marketing rehearsal. I know how to like, move actors around. Like I've learned enough from sitting next to operators and great operators to like kind of how to run the set and like
to drive the bus.
Yeah, and like, here's the frame and here's what I'm going to see and here's where the boom can go and all that. There's a reflection and just like lean into all that stuff and just.
So just to put it in perspective, you basically felt like you knew all the parts of operating except the operating part
that
of
is
operating.
Absolutely
that was
correct.
The problem.
Yeah. And so I said, I'm just like, if anything, I'll just like play one on TV until the red light goes on and then we'll see if I got it or not.
Keep them in the box at least.
And
and
just from coming from like an athletic background, it was just kind of like, I don't know, I hope I just can do it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I thought. I didn't put too much thought into like the actual execution of the shot.
Yeah.
Because it was more just like if I can take care of everything else, the stuff I know, then I can at least hopefully put myself in the position to just kind of have the best shot of doing
it. But that's actually really interesting that you say that because I was just talking with someone the other day about like when you're doubting yourself on set, which obviously that is, but as an operator who's established, like when something goes wrong and you're like spiraling and you're like, I can't do this or whatever. Everybody has something different, but I was talking about the fact that I hyper focus on something and the reason that I hyper focus on something is because it doesn't allow me any mental energy to like think about the other stuff. And it sort of sounds like you were doing that. You were like, I'm not gonna think about the one thing I can't do. I'll just concentrate on the stuff I can do and hope.
For sure. And I mean, I had kind of like some bad habits right off the bat because I was keeping like a loose head because I was worried that I wasn't gonna, and then like I found out like a loose head and a long lens is not a good idea.
I got you.
And then like there's a couple times where it was like I was learning on the fly.
Yeah, right.
And I was doing it well enough, it seems, and I was probably, I mean, honestly, in a place where I was going to get away with it.
Well, you were being supported. I mean, at least
and so I did kind of just, the take 2s and 3s and 4s were always better. And I always kept, and then by week 2, and not like I had figured it out by any means, but at least it was like kind of feeling like, okay, I can do this.
I can do this.
People are looking at me with like, okay, you can do this.
Yeah.
What do you
that's
think?
Fascinating.
Yeah. And so that was definitely just kind of what that journey was like on that project because it was just kind of like, okay. And then by the time I left, I was like, there was one, and I say this to this day, but then, 8th grade ended up doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And obviously Bo's a really, 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 really smart guy, like genius level smart. And Elsie, who it was the main actress in the film,
Okay, yeah.
is like blew us away
Great.
every day.
Yep, yep.
And I mean, she was actually 14. She was a eighth grader
She's an eighth grader.
playing
Wow.
an eighth grader, and Bo was very smart to cast her. And she, I mean, we were just keeping up with her. I'm not.
Well, I was going to say, it almost sounds like it's one of those things like, I don't really have to do well. I just have to not screw up.
Yes.
And if I screw up, I can't screw up completely.
Yes. And I mean, and I was definitely put in the position where like we were all staying together because this
Yeah.
is like, early, like I don't remember actually like what the actual specifics of it were, but it's like it was like one of the early movies that A24 produced themselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like it was right around like the Moonlight, kind of all those movies around that time.
Yep.
And so we were like this low budget kind of, I don't even know what the budget for that movie was, but it was not a lot.
Yeah.
And we were all living together. It was like me, Drew, Chris, Bo, and the production designer, Sam Lisenko, were all living together.
Wow.
So like it was kind of like this incredible like filmmaking incubator that we were put in, because like every day we would just go home together and talk about what we had to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
So like I kind of like got to know what prep was
that's
like in a weird
great.
way too, because we just were constantly in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we were constantly like, Bo would come in and be like, hey, look at this, or I want to do this, or like,
Yeah,
how should we
yeah.
block this, or blah, 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 blah. And like, it was just kind of this
That's
place that
great.
we never really turned it off. We didn't want to. It was
Yeah.
kind of nice. And I'm sure some of them probably wanted to turn it off at some point.
Yeah, but
But,
for you, it was like the more
But for
you
me,
can
I
get.
was totally in. I was like, this is the best. Like, and
Yeah.
like now I feel like I'm a part of this like creative
That's really
team
cool.
where it was like like it was one of those things too where I was just like, one of these things doesn't belong,
You're just like being as quiet as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Nodding your head a lot and saying yes.
But it was just like an incredible education, and just like such a really like fast forwarded the flight time
Yeah.
of being an operator.
That's
because
amazing.
Just going through that experience was like super eye opening.
And do you remember who the Dolly Group was on the show?
Yeah, it was actually the key grip. His name was Paul Goodstein.
Uh-huh.
And I can't remember where he was from, but he was like new to New York.
Yeah.
But he had like a great background. He had done all this awesome stuff.
Oh, no way.
But he was like trying to get into the New York market because his family had moved out there. I think he was living in Philadelphia. So he was like commuting back and forth. But he was like, he kind of like, I think, took a job that was probably beneath him.
Yeah.
Just because he was just trying to work and get his name out there. And he was awesome. And he ended up pushing Dolly for me. And like, we did some really like cool stuff that like, he had to tell me what to do.
Well, so this is that's why I asked, is because as a new operator, I mean, a really
that doesn't new like doesn't even cover it.
I mean, do you just cop to the Dolly Group and go, look, I don't know how to set up a Dolly show?
Oh, dude, for sure. I was like, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
Help.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of that. And then the other thing too is that movie became very handheld, which just the nature of what they wanted to do anyway.
That helps.
So like we did kind of 50-50 probably in that movie, was half and half. And so like I knew that the handheld stuff I could at least like just kind of lean on the fact that I was an athlete, and I'm like, I'll just hopefully be able to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that stuff that was a little less nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
But there was also Ronin work.
Oh boy.
And that was back in the day when it was like you carried the Ronin.
Yeah.
With like no help.
Yeah.
Just
ran
carrying
around, physically.
So like their shots in 8th grade, like one of the best things that ever, like one of the greatest compliments I got was from a local Steadicam guy who asked me who did Steadicam on 8th grade. And I was like,
now I gotta watch it.
And I was like, it's me holding a Ronin. And he was just like, dude, those look good. And I was like, and that's when I was like, I had a moment where I was like, huh. I was like, I fooled him.
Yeah.
Like,
that's fantastic. That's great.
Because I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. And like, that was all new to me. I had never operated a Ronin before. They were like, here you go. And I'm like, yes, so I'll try this.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll point this. So what did you do about, I mean, how'd you figure out how to frame things? Or did you just go, I'm going to keep them in the box, and if they like it, I'll keep doing that? And
yeah, I think that I had learned so much about it probably without really giving it too much thought from watching Drew operate. I think Drew taught me how to operate.
Okay.
And at least in that regard.
On the commercials.
I think that my sensibility certainly comes from him.
And was he giving you a lot of feedback as well? Like
I don't really remember. I think we kind of just talked about what they wanted. And then like we would go for it. And then I think it was a little bit more of like the tweak from there
That's
because,
fantastic.
but I think that again, well, all of them are so smart. And I think part of the reason that Drew wanted to even give me the shot in the first place is because he's like, no one's seen what I've been doing more than you. And
Okay.
so like
You're probably going to do what I do.
I'm
So,
working
yeah.
on building this look and
Yeah,
this
yeah.
body of
Yeah.
work that has kind of like a signature to it.
That's cool.
And I think that he knew that if I can't do it, there's only one person that's seen as much of it as I
Yeah,
have.
yeah. At least you get the best shot at it.
So at least he can have that going for him,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so I definitely would like the very like close center cut framing and stuff like that in that movie like was all Drew and
Yeah.
like the kind of like the little like rat pushing handheld like all those little like weird quirks in that movie are all him.
That's
Like
great.
that's all stuff that I was just trying to do what he did.
Yeah.
The only difference is that Drew used to cradle the camera like like kind of like by
For
his
handheld,
gut.
you mean? Yeah.
Like you because like in the C300 like kind of like days like that. And it turns out that 6'2" Drew, whatever he is, that's about where my shoulder is. So it just kind of worked out.
Gary's slightly shorter than 6'2". Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So you did that for a month.
Yeah, it was a 28-day shoot, I think.
And then did you come out of that and you're like, I'm an operator?
No, I did not. I really didn't. I went right back to being the 8-camera second on Chicago Fire for like 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
And didn't operate again.
Really?
And then like that, I was like watching all the hoopla about 8th grade when it was like at Sundance and people were digging it, and it was like kind of like getting a little bit of like early like traction on like social media and all
and
that
you're
stuff.
throwing down marks.
And I was in between takes being like, oh, look at that. We made Obama's top 10 list, and then they're like, "Can you move to your left?"
Yeah.
Like,
Excuse me, move your foot. That's fantastic. And I mean,
has anyone seen my slate mark?
Were you thinking like I got to make the jump, or you're thinking I got a job, I don't want to mess this up?
Yeah, I think it was more of like I felt so not qualified at the time, like in that world. If that makes sense. Like I still felt like I was not an operator, and like I was lucky to just have the job I had on Chicago Fire, and it was like if Drew will give me another shot, like that's probably how it would happen.
That's probably how it'll happen.
Yeah.
And did you go back and start though like paying attention to the operators more?
I definitely had a different take. Yes, for sure. I definitely had a different idea of like what they. Now I was watching them a little bit differently, and honestly, it made me a better second because I knew how to help them more.
Sure.
And like so that was something that really like skyrocketed my confidence as a second for those next 2 years, because it was like, oh, okay, like I not only do I know how to do this job, but now I know how to do that job, and it just made me
that's great.
so much more like I had so much more intuition and all that stuff about like, oh, I can see where his head is going and I can jump on that. Yeah.
And so you did that for 2 years, and then how'd you make the jump to operating?
So
full time.
So the original DP of Chicago Fire was Lisa Wiegand, who has become a good friend of mine. She's great, but she left to go do some other shows, and one of her operators had taken over as the DP of Chicago Fire. So that's who I started with full time. And then for whatever, I can't remember exactly how it shook up. I mean, I think he moved on and she came back or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then so she came back to Chicago Fire, and I had kind of like known her from a distance. Like I didn't really know her that well. So like I did a whole season with her as the second.
Oh.
And I was the second. My operator was Vanessa Joy Smith, who is a great DP on her own right now. She does like Mayans, and
cool.
and a show called The Cleaning Lady.
Cleaning Lady, in New Mexico.
And she's awesome, and I learned a lot from her as an operator too. And then she kind of outed me to Lisa, and she was just like, "Hey, did you know that this guy did 8th grade?" And she was just, and then Lisa was like, came up to me like mad one day. She's like, "Hey, what's your deal?" And I was like, "What did I do?" And she was just like, "You operate this movie, you're just not going to tell me?" And I was just like, "Well, she's like, do you want to operate?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Okay, you're operating next week."
That's great.
And it was just like that. And like
you were on B or you were on A?
I did a B camera on a second unit.
Okay.
And she took me with her.
Yeah.
And so for people that have never watched Chicago Fire, it's a primarily handheld show,
Okay.
and there's like short zooms, like
Gotcha.
like a 19 to 90 or what have
Yeah.
you, and like zooming in the shot is part of it's like kind of got
Yeah.
that like docu style.
Okay.
So like I had to like kind of, which is something I had never done before either. So I had to like get comfortable like on the barrel, like
Uh-huh.
zooming and making it usable
Yep.
and like kind of all that stuff. And she must have seen something in me, because then that was season 7, and then season 8 came around, and I was the B camera
That's
operator,
great.
and then I just kind of was off to the
And
races.
basically you've been operating since then.
I've been operating ever since,
That's
and
fantastic.
it was she definitely was the one to really give me the space to get good,
Yeah.
because with Drew, I had learned so much, but the one thing that I couldn't get from him at the time was the flight time,
Yeah.
because he was still making
He
a
just didn't
living
have
doing
enough
his own
things going on,
thing
and
and
he
doing
was yeah.
commercials,
And he was
and
probably operating when he was on commercials.
of course,
So
and yeah, and
yeah.
so I it was kind of like the best thing that could have ever happened, because she really gave me the freedom to screw up and get good.
Yeah.
And Will Eichler was the A camera
Oh yeah. Sure.
operator on that show, and he was very helpful, and like definitely those two shepherded me kind of those first few weeks, where it was just like, okay, like let's get you
Yeah.
on your feet on the
Yeah,
ground.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm like such a competitive guy, where it was like she knew that, and she was very smart about like coming up to me and just being like, yeah, you're not very good at the long lens stuff, or like she would kind of prod me, and then like the next thing you know, I was like, okay, well
Yeah.
I'm not gonna let that happen.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so she really like kind of helped me get good quicker, just by motivating me like that, and kind of like,
That's great.
yeah, she's very, very smart, and she knows how to take care of people like that and
Uh-huh.
motivate people. And like I and then I did that for 3 years
Oh wow.
there, 8, 9, and 10.
So you really cut your teeth there.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
did 22, whatever. So I probably
Yeah.
ended up doing like
60
almost
some
60
episodes.
episodes of
Yep. Yep.
television as an
Yeah,
operator.
that was like me with ER, and it's just
Yeah.
like you come out of that, and I mean, you don't even know what what you've learned.
Yeah,
It's
and it was like a kind of it was nice, because it was such a handheld show, and that was something that I knew I could, and that was where I really got good at handheld,
Mhm.
because I didn't have a choice. But it was also like the stunt work
yeah,
was so big in that show.
sure.
And like every episode, there's a fire, and there's a this, and there's a that. And so I kind of really got that part of it, was just something that I was not very versed on yet. Was, you know, I had to put on the fire suit and go in a burning building with a
Yeah, yeah.
handheld camera, and
Right?
like, and you gotta, it's real.
Yeah.
If something goes wrong, someone's gonna get very hurt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so like
yeah.
the safety side of things was really like an eye-opening experience for me on that. And just like the nature of like there's 11 cast members, and you got to remember all their lines, and like,
Uh-huh.
and I was the B camera guy, and like, and something I had never done before. I had only operated as A camera
Sure.
and with one camera, so
Yeah.
there was no other
And not
camera.
with a huge cast.
Yeah, and
yeah.
so I really had to cut my teeth with that. But going back to Chris Duskin, great advice from him. He goes, "I'm a B," because he was the B camera operator on Mind Games, and he's
Yep.
like, "All I am is an editor out here," and I never
That's great.
forgot about it.
Yeah.
And so, and especially the nature of Chicago Fire, where it is a very cutty show.
Yep.
Like I dare you to count to 4 before there's a cut. So it's like I started to like really figure it out, where it was like, oh, I'm the pieces guy.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I
Oh, that's a great way to look at it. That's
and
really
like,
good.
and then I kind of understood, where it was just like, get the hands.
Yep.
Oh, they're gonna hold hands. I better get that.
Yeah.
And then as I got better and better at it, I kind of started to get to the leash, where they were like, Gary's, you can do whatever you want on this one.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Try
You're
to
gonna find something interesting. You
find,
know what you're doing.
find the story, find that
Yeah,
little
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? And like that kind of became like something that I leaned into, and then kind of slowly started doing A camera work on that show, just like second units and whatnot, And then at season 10, halfway through, I left to go do season 1 of The Bear.
Oh wow. My gosh, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, let me go before we get to The Bear. So do you think that there's you think just listening to you talk about that, it made me think about it. You think that there's benefit to going through the B camera route before you become the A camera operator for that reason?
For me, it definitely helped me. I think it just at the other well, I've kind of like given this a lot of thought over the years too, because I've obviously done B camera work since,
Yeah.
and for great A camera operators such as yourself. So it's like I think that it just kind of unlocks that lane to be in.
Yeah.
So it just kind of, I don't know, because like there's something about being put in the box on B camera that makes you more creative
Yeah.
in a weird way, because you kind of have to like fight your way into making it work
Yeah.
and like do it without fighting your way,
Yep.
because you can't be a problem
Yeah.
either.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Yeah.
So like I think that really allowed me to like kind of look at how to tell the story without being a nuisance.
Yep.
And like I think it unlocked a kind of way of like thinking about it that way.
Yeah.
Whereas like on A camera, like everything's at your disposal. Everybody's there to make your shot right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then like how do you as a B camera add value to that without anybody noticing you're
Without
there?
exactly, without upsetting the apple cart or anything
Yeah.
like that.
And so I think Chicago Fire was a really, really great way to work for me to learn, because like I said, like it was such a pieces show that like I knew that it was like, okay, if I treat this shot as if it's one shot, like that they're gonna use all the way through, but
Yeah.
I know they're not. Like it kind of allowed me to like treat B camera like A camera in that regard,
Yeah.
but also know that like I was only gonna have to pull out so much of it,
Yep.
if that makes sense.
No, that's fantastic.
So like, and then as I got more and more confident and they started getting more and more confident in me, then I wasn't so scared to do things where it was like, hey, you gonna see over here? And they're just like, no. And I'm like 60
Boom.
feet of track.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like I kind of like got ushered into like that through that, where I think I think I was able to jump into B camera because of my experience with Duskin.
Yep.
And also the fact that I had done A camera in 8th grade.
Sure.
And had been on B camera as a second, so I kind of knew what.
Yeah, you've had this really weird education.
It's very strange, I know. And so like I think I knew like how to do that, but then at the same time, like being a B camera guy definitely made me a better A camera operator.
Yeah. Well,
No doubt
but you
about
and I
it.
have done 2 jobs now where you've been gracious enough to come in and do B camera. And what the first job that we did together was the reboot of Justified. And what John Lindley, DP, and I immediately realized was like, oh, there's an A camera operator on B camera.
Which is, I don't even like, it's so funny to like hear you guys say that, because again, it's the same thing as before where I'm like, really?
But that's probably good. But again, it's because, and you and I have talked about this a lot, it's because you're just looking for the story. And like you said,
Yeah.
I mean, if it's funny that comes from Duskin, because it very much is it. You are the editor, and it's just like you're just looking for the pieces of the story, and the more pieces you can get
Yeah.
without being in the way. And I think I know what you mean about, because I haven't done a lot of B camera, but when I have, I actually sort of really do enjoy the fact that you have those parameters, as opposed to like an A camera where you're like, you can do anything. And it's
Yeah.
sort of why I can't sit down and write a story. But if someone gives me a story, I can help like
Exactly.
go, oh, you should cut this out, or you should get I'm better with parameters.
Sure.
And it's like you have these parameters, you're like, okay, this is what I can do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you said something that made me think about it, because I've worked with a couple people who like, have just started out as B camera operators, and they'll come and they'll pitch a shot. And sometimes I'll go, why do we need this shot? Or what is this shot telling? And it's that thing of like, don't just find a shot.
Yeah.
It's a question of, does the shot have value to it? Does it add to the story? And there's a huge part of that being a B camera operator. But that's really fascinating. So then you started this TV show called The Bear with Chris and Andrew. And this is the first time you've worked with Chris where he's directing, other than the documentary?
Yes.
Okay.
And I had done the pilot before season 10. So like the pilot was done like, yeah, the end of June or whatever it was. There was a 6-day pilot, which is the first episode of The Bear, that we shot right before season 10 of Chicago Fire started.
Okay.
So I was like just available to do it. Like I literally did it, and then like 2 days later started season 10.
Wow.
And Drew was not available to shoot it. He was doing a show in town called Light Years that I think ended up becoming Night Sky on Amazon.
Okay.
It's with J.K. Simmons and Sissy Spacek.
Oh, okay.
But so they brought Chris brought Adam Newport Barra in, who's also a very, very, very talented cinematographer,
Mhm.
and who had just done Last Black Man in San Francisco, which I was such a huge fan of.
Yeah.
And so like I was like I had literally like a week before that told someone, I was like, oh, he's the guy, he's one of the guys on the list that I'd love to work with,
That's
and then lo
cool.
and behold,
There you go.
there we are.
That's very cool.
And he was, and I didn't, he's a really nice guy, but he's demanding, and
Mhm.
like he's very he knows what he wants, and like he's gonna tell you if you didn't get it,
Yeah.
which was like something that I needed, quite
Okay.
honestly.
That's good. Yeah.
Because like I had kind of come up in this kind of like fluffy environment, So
So basically, you weren't protected anymore. on
no,
that
and I
level.
think I was, because I mean you'd have to ask Adam, I don't know, but I mean he, I think Chris probably was
Sure, but
nudged me a little bit more than he would have
Yeah.
anybody else.
but
Yeah.
you're not protected in the same way as if Chris and Andrew were there.
No, and I mean, and Chris certainly is somebody who is very much the same way as, in he's, they're both really, really nice guys, but they want what they want,
Yeah.
and they want to get it, and that's it. And you can either do it or you can't. And so the story with that goes that I showed up to the first day of the pilot, and it was I showed up 20 minutes early of my pre-call.
Yeah.
So I'm like super early. Track's already down. Like the shot is set up
Wow.
for me. And I was just like, ooh. And Mike Pennick, who is a great dolly grip and now
Yep.
camera
Now
operator.
camera operator.
And he was my dolly grip at the time. And he came right when I walked in. He was the first guy that I saw, and he was looking at me like, "Oh boy." And I was just like, "What's going
Yeah.
on?" And he's just like, "Wait till you get a load of this one." And I was
Wow.
just like, "Okay." And we were on. Remember those old HR, those like 25 to 120 lenses,
Yeah,
whatever that
yeah,
they were
yeah,
like.
yeah.
I think they're old like I don't know where they. I can't remember what they were, but
yeah.
they're the Cooks. I think they're old
Okay.
Cooks, but they're big, they're huge, and so that was one of the lenses that we were using. And the plan was to have, it was about 30 feet of track, and we're on like this. It wasn't a set in the pilot. Like the kitchen that became the kitchen of the Bear in the season 1 was based on this.
So there's no space because it's not built.
Oh
for
my God, it was
filming.
so
Yeah,
tiny.
yeah.
Yeah. And so we were on like a Cobra dolly, because like you
Oh,
couldn't even
jeez.
do anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
But that one, I think we were on normal Pee Wee. But we so the point, and Jeremy, it's the shot in the pilot, if anybody knows it, where it's like Jeremy's laying down and he's gonna sit up and we're pushing into him,
Okay.
and it's like he's waking up from this like fever dream that he has that starts the season off. And so we got to push in 30 feet as fast as we can, and I'm at a 25, and I have to zoom into 120 while we're doing, because
While
it's
you're
supposed to make it
Yeah.
seem really, really
Yep.
fast. And now we're gonna land about 3 inches or whatever it is from Jeremy's face, and we got to nail it. And Jason Bonner, who is also a great
Oh, yeah.
focus puller, was my focus puller, and we're all looking at each other, being like, we might be available
This
by
is
the
shot
afternoon.
one.
Yeah.
Nice.
And so we went for it, and we did it, and it was just like one of those moments where it was like the sigh of I can't even like justify the sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Between us three.
Yeah.
Where it was just like, oh, thank God.
Well, it's like I guess we passed the audition.
And then it was also the eye-opening moment too of like, like us thinking it went well the first take, and they're like, faster, and then I was like, how about that? Yeah, faster.
Yeah.
And then it was like, you guys got to go faster.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, we got it. And then we're like, oh man, thank God, that was incredible. Like, I'm ready to go home. Like, I'm already like spent.
Yeah.
And Adam just comes up, he goes, okay, here's what's next. And I was just like, oh, this is what this job really
Yep.
is.
Okay.
Like I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is demanding.
But he was
in the
happy with the work.
but in the
obviously.
best way,
Yeah.
because it was just like
That's great.
they pushed us to do things that we definitely hadn't had to do
That's
before.
fantastic.
And I had never really done the wheels before.
Oh, really?
I mean, I had done them, but not like that.
You were using them on the dolly, or you were using them?
I was on a
the
Moses
Ronin?
head.
Moses head. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so I'm whipping around on a Cobra dolly, like doing whip pans and like
But had you-
taking people around corners. And I had never done any of that stuff before.
You hadn't even practiced on the wheels?
No, I mean, I had.
You have any idea how lucky you are?
I had like a little bit of experience because I did some work as a head tech and stuff. So like I messed around with the wheels
Yeah,
quite
but
a
it's not
bit,
the same.
but I'd never done a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So like that was really scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was definitely nervous
But
about that
did you
stuff.
screw up, or did you get?
Oh,
through
there
it?
were definitely times where it was just like, whoops,
Yeah.
lost him.
Yeah.
Let's reset,
Yeah.
and just try to play it cool
Yep.
and just,
Well, that's all you can do at that
Yeah.
point, right?
because I definitely, and then I started getting comfortable with them, and now I'm very comfortable with
Yeah.
them. But it's yeah, that was definitely,
That's wild.
but that 6 days on that pilot really, I really like added another level of cutting my teeth.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was, I mean, that was like a nothing little pilot, right? It probably wasn't. I mean,
Oh
there's
man.
no huge stars. There's no. It probably
Well, at the
wasn't big.
time,
Probably
yeah, for
wasn't big
sure.
money. I mean, it's like just people getting together making a pilot, going, "I hope this goes somewhere," right?
Yeah, and I don't remember how it all. I mean, you know, the actual particulars of how it came to be, but I read the Bear script like 10 years before that or whatever it
Oh,
was,
whoa.
because it was a movie originally
Oh,
that Chris had written
oh,
a
this is just something
long.
that's been rattling around in his
Chris
brain
had
for
been
a
working
while.
on.
I gotcha.
We had heard about it from him for years, and Chris
Okay.
is just this like. I mean, I don't want to toot his horn too much, but he is also a genius, and he definitely like can just he's a phenomenal writer, just
Yeah.
an incredible
Yeah,
writer.
clearly.
And he had been telling us about this story forever that he had been talking about, and it was one of many that he had, in his in some safe somewhere,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was originally like the pilot was the movie,
Okay.
and then for whatever reason it became a show
Yeah.
at FX, and then the pilot became like the story that the movie was ultimately was like the pilot,
Yeah.
and then it kind of
Then it took off from
snowballed
there.
from there. Yeah.
And so you've been doing that. You're now shooting your third season of this, right?
Now we are, yeah.
Okay. And I apologize because I didn't mention originally you were nominated 2 years in a row for the SOC Camera Operator of the Year award for your work on the Bear. Very much deserved.
Well, I was I was lucky to be included in that list, and I lost to you the one year.
Sorry.
And
I don't view it as losing, actually. It's funny because just side note about that. I was talking with someone this past year because I gave out the feature award and you were up for
well, and Neil won, and he
award.
was super. I
And
won
Neil
that.
Bryant won.
I won a couple bets.
Oh,
I
really?
put my money on him.
Get-
So
Neil Bryant, amazing Steadicam operator who did the what's it called?
Last of Us. Yeah.
Amazing work.
And
But
that much again, not to cut you up, but much again, like I was when I watched the clip from Ozark of yours, I was like, I turned to Chris Day, RP camera operator, and I was like, I don't think we're gonna win. And then
That's very
the
kind
same
of
thing
you.
happened again when Neil's like doing wonders through houses
the
and
thing is,
gunfights, and I'm just like, I don't think we're gonna win.
you and I were both on the feature committee to determine which 10 and then 5 would finally be the ones that everybody would vote on. And I think we talked about this is like, yeah, from an award point of view, there has to be a winner.
Sure.
But the reality is like they're all exceptional examples of work.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. I don't think about it as losing. It's more of just me kind of,
Yeah, of course.
poking fun at myself
Yeah.
as a two-time loser. But
And I will say this, and this is actually sort of what I was getting to, is at the SOC Awards, and I think I told you this, I've never bet at anything like that where some more people have come up to me and be like, do you know Gary Malouf, the guy who did the Bear? I want to meet him. And all these big operators wanted to meet you because you're doing this incredible work on this show. And I'm wondering, now that I know more of your story, like, first of all, how weird is it to like
the imposter syndrome is very strong. Yeah, if that's what you're asking.
the imposter
Yeah.
syndrome in that one is very strong.
And again, and it's the theme of like, why would
Yeah.
they want to meet me?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, but that's probably better than like, of course you want to meet me, which is what a Steadicam operator would say.
I was like,
but-
did they like mix it up? Do they think I'm someone else?
but is it weird to be operating on what's arguably one of the biggest shows out there?
I mean, I guess not. No, I don't think so. I mean, to me, it's just because, again, like I said, it's like you're telling stories with your friends, and it's
Yeah.
kind of like the best.
That's what it sounds like. I
Yeah.
mean, I came to visit you on set, and it just
Yeah.
seemed like that. It just seemed like a bunch of people having a good time.
Yeah, and I mean, it's such a nice place to be, and
That's
it's
great.
like all been, and especially for like me and Drew and Chris specifically together, like we've just been doing it for so long that like
Yeah.
there's such a shorthand there, and there's like having done this for 2 seasons and now starting the third, but we're like, I don't know, whatever, 2.5, 3 weeks in, and it's just kind of one of those things where it's just keep talking about like we got to just keep going, level up, and just try to
Do you
try
feel,
to
do you feel
not
that
put the pressures on ourselves,
yeah,
but
that's what I was going to ask you.
just kind of keep
just keep
continuing
doing
to
it.
get better at our
Do you
craft.
feel that
Yeah.
there's a pressure to make it better and better? as opposed to just making it consistently good. I don't know if that's the right thing.
I don't think that really like I'm sure there is that pressure somewhere along the chain,
Yeah.
but like I don't
You're
feel
not
it.
feeling it. Yeah.
Yeah, just because Chris shows up so prepared,
Yeah.
and like he's such a good storyteller and such a good writer, and our actors are so good.
That's great.
And the people that are around us that are actually from these restaurants that come from that world and are these disciplined like world-renowned chefs, like you're just surrounded by the best
Yeah.
people. So it's like, again, you're just there to be like, this story is here for us to tell. We just keep it simple.
Yeah.
It's like it's like that's kind of how I've always thought about it, where it's just like, we really have everything at our set up for us for it to be great.
Just don't screw it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what I used to tell kids when I was a hitting coach back in the day, where it was just like, you want to be like coming in here like swinging your bat around like, some big leaguer that you want to be like, but it's just like you're not.
Yeah.
And it's like this is already really hard.
Hit the ball.
And anything that you do is going to make it harder.
Yeah.
So it's like just keep this simple.
That's really good.
Like
That's really
what's
good.
cool is hitting well,
Yeah.
not about how you look when you strike out. Like so
Yeah.
like that's kind of how I've always thought about it, where it's like if we just kind of tell this story that's been set up for us,
Yeah.
we'll probably
You're probably going to
do
do good
well.
work.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because and I mean I've told this story before, so I'll truncate it. But when I first met you, and we went out for some food before we started Justify, just so we could say hello. You said there's a show coming out called The Bear, and I did this handheld shot and blah blah blah. And I think you described it to me, and it's one of those things where it's like I don't know what you're talking about, so I'm sort of listening, but I don't really completely understand
Yeah.
it. And I don't think you mentioned how long it was. And then eventually, when it came out, I was like, "What episode is it?" And you told me, and I watched it. And then it just kept going and going. And what is it? 17 minutes long, I
So,
think.
yeah, it's
And
whatever.
it's the entire episode. And
Something
it's
like
not a. I mean, of course, it's a gimmick because everything's a gimmick, but it's not a gimmick. It's actually a great way to tell a story. And I called you up and I was like, Gary, it's not a long shot. It's an entire episode. And you were like, oh yeah, I guess it is. But no, it's
There's a little intro sequence.
but it's a great. It's a great. What? Tell me, episode 7, season 1.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, having heard you say just about the simplicity of it, it's like I'm not saying it's not a complicated shot, and I'm not saying it wasn't hard to do.
Yeah.
But really, what you were doing was just very, very well following the story in that,
Yeah.
and the story dictated exactly what you did. I mean, I'm not to diminish what it is.
No, and
by any means.
to me, that was like the thing, and I know it was important to everybody because when that first came out first came up as an idea,
Yeah.
my first inclination was just like, I mean, we can like, I was kind of like,
Is it going to work?
it wasn't so much is it going to work as I just didn't want to like cool for cool sake in my mind is like the ultimate death,
Yes.
and like,
Well, is it about the shot or is it about the story?
yeah, and like, so I was just kind of like very like I certainly wasn't like standoffish about it at all. I was just like, of course, I was like, if you want to let me try that, I'm in.
Yeah.
But like at
100%.
the same time, it was just like, is this right? And then
Yeah.
like as Chris kind of like fleshed it out and kind of kept revisiting it with us, and like him and Drew were talking, and then bringing me into the mix, it was just more and more like, well, should we bring in a Steadicam guy? Can we do this? Because we did a lot of work on the Ronin, on like the on the dolly, where I was on the wheels, and we are like, if we're opening up a can of worms here, we're like, this is never gonna work, and like we don't have the space, and like blah blah blah. And then once the handheld kind of conversation started, and then it started becoming like, him, like Chris literally went back and rewrote the script
Yeah.
to
To-
like
to tailor it.
basically map out what was going
Yeah,
to happen,
yeah.
and like really like broke it up into all these different scenes. So like we almost didn't think about it as a oneer, because it was just like, how can we get to this scene?
Yeah.
And then what can take us to the next scene?
Yeah.
And then like, so it is a oneer and it is not going to cut, but like we didn't think about it necessarily as that, because it had to be a whole episode. It had to have all these different, and there's so many things that are happening with, these characters are yelling at each other, and this
Yep.
character's going through something, and this character's going through something. And like, how do we make sure that we incorporate all these things in order for this story to
Yeah.
even work?
Well, it works exceptionally well, and the truth of the matter is I mean, you don't recognize really that it's a continuous take. And it's funny, I wouldn't even call it a oneer, and then you said it that way, because it is in the sense that you don't cut the camera, but it's like it really is different parts of the same. I mean, it's the same scene because it's all going on together, but it's different moments in it that you're capturing.
And there was like so much things that, again, it was kind of to harken back to what it's like to be on B camera. It was like kind of like almost freeing to be put in the box,
Yeah.
because it was just like, okay, well, like I have to do the close up of this donut. We have to see the donut. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
and that kind of just like makes that call for you,
Yep.
because that's the story,
Yeah.
and I have to do it. So then how can we do it? And then it's like, okay, well, like it's from him to the donut to him, and he's pissed. And it's like, well, that tells that story about as good as it can.
That's exactly right.
And it's just, so it was just like a lot of that stuff was just kind of like put in place because Chris blocked it so well,
Yeah.
and the actors are so good. And just the fact too that like everybody was in this crazy thing together, where it was like, don't be the one to drop the screw up, you know, because you know, I know, you know that feeling.
It's funny because it does elevate everybody's game, because everybody's like, I can't be the one to screw this up. Like somebody's going to, but it's
Yeah.
not going to be me.
And the one fascinating thing about it too that I had never really like considered until like we really started putting it on its feet was is that like that nobody gets to stop acting.
Yeah.
You know, even though I'm at the opposite side of the set,
You could catch
doing
him.
this tube shot of Richie and Io, like I see people in the background, I feel people in the background. People are still working, because when I get to the other part, this stuff's all got to get done,
Yeah.
because everybody's actually cooking and the thing is on, and we
Yeah.
did fire 34 chickens and whatever the hell else, you know. So it's like all that stuff is going on in the
And
background.
they're really, you told me they're really cooking.
Yeah.
Yeah. They know how to
Stoves
do
were
all that
on and
stuff.
hot. Oh yeah, the cast is amazing. They're good.
That's incredible.
I mean, like it's like Jeremy and Io especially are very, very, very good with the food stuff.
Yeah.
Because like they're obviously, their characters are so like
At the top of
at the top,
yeah.
yeah, and they do a very, very good job. And so much of what I think makes the show feel so like visceral and real to people is because they are so good
They're
at that
doing it,
stuff.
yeah.
So I can go from their hands to their face, and you can see what it's like to
Yeah.
actually build a dish,
Yeah.
and like how focused those people are and
It's
everything.
really cool.
And then all the other, and I mean, like Lionel's really good in the bakery, and he's done some really beautiful stuff with like making all these like, and like he went to, this is an awesome story. He went to like Noma or wherever, some fancy restaurant in Copenhagen, and then they used it as a storyline in season 2 where he goes.
Yeah.
But like when he came back, like it was early on where like we had to like, in the first season early on, Maddie Matheson was the culinary producer as well as being an actor on the show, and like we had to like have the moment with Lionel where it's like, you're not that good yet.
You mean
in the story
he went there in order to learn,
and he got good,
yeah,
and then he came
and then you
back, and
gotta
it's
dial
like
it back.
but it's like early on in season 1, and it's like, oh, you're not that good
You
yet.
can't do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's great. That's really cool. So did they send all them to like
Oh
some
yeah,
sort of culinary school?
oh
or
for
something?
sure, yeah.
Wow.
And like I think Jeremy actually did a night of service at a place called Pajali, and I think it's in
Really?
Santa Monica, and like was actually like there, like doing it for real.
That's really cool.
And I mean, I don't know what he was doing, but I
No,
think he
but
was actually,
the
you know,
real
like
deal. That's amazing.
being depended on. You
The other
know?
thing I'll share, well, there's two things. One is anybody listening, you should check out the breakdown. Well, and by the time this is out, probably the breakdowns that Gary has done on the website, theop.io, because you broke down that scene and
Yeah.
when you did on season 2 really well, and also map of
Yeah, Tiny Perfect Things.
perfect things,
Yeah.
which is a really cool sort of crane shot. But and the other thing is, when I came to visit you, you pointed out that you had 2 5-star Michelin chefs. Is that, am I saying it right? Who would like do the food prep?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I you know, they've worked at numerous
Yeah.
Michelin starred restaurants.
They're,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. And so I said, you know, do you get hungry all the time? And you pulled out the spoon
My
that
tasting
you have
spoon. Yeah.
etched with your name on it. It seemed like everybody there has one. So you guys just basically eat through the day.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we definitely are a little spoiled in that regard. There's no doubt about it.
That's a pretty nice perk.
And once it turned into a Michelin star restaurant, it definitely got a little bit better than eating Italian beef,
Yeah,
like
'cause
9
you can
times a
only do
day.
so
Yeah. So
long.
the menu expanding was definitely good for everybody.
That's
yeah.
fantastic. Oh, that's great. I love that. So, so now you're on this, and then who the hell knows where it's going to go from this? But you're in season 3, and you've got season 4 now, was just announced. So
Yeah.
you're employed for a while.
Yeah, I mean, they were, We're doing them back to back. So yeah, we go till whatever it is in the first week of June or something
Yeah.
like that.
So since you've started the Bear, you and I have actually worked together
Yeah.
twice, and you've been kind
Yeah.
enough to come and do B camera, which
Which
is
is
like way beneath you.
Kidding me?
But
No way, it was the best.
but so is there a mental game that changes when you go from being A camera to B camera?
Well, I know yeah, for sure, and I think you guys will probably act shocked when I say this, but I mean, like, you know, when I got the call to interview for Justified, I had just gotten through. I was just finishing season 1 of The
Okay.
Bear.
Yeah.
So
It
like
wasn't even out yet
it
because
wasn't even
I
out
didn't know what
yet.
it was when
Yeah.
you told me about
And
it.
so
Yeah.
like I got in with John because of Shannon DeWolf, and they'd know each other, and she was on the first season with us.
Yeah.
And she was put the good word in for me, I
Oh,
think.
so Shannon mentioned your name to John Lindley, our DP. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And so, which was very nice of her. And, and obviously John is John and is awesome. And I had admired him from afar,
He's
obviously.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had always heard from people how great he was. And like, I know that Sean had worked with him and, you
Yeah.
know, and so he was somebody that was definitely like on this like pedestal for me, for sure.
Yeah.
And I get the call to go and interview with him. And it was just kind of like, well, I'm not going to get it.
But I'll go meet him.
But I was like, this will be cool, like
Yeah.
I'll get to sit down with John Lindley. It'll be a nice thing to
That's
have
great.
under my,
Yeah.
experience
Yeah.
to have had. And then like when I actually got the job, like, because at the time I'm thinking like, dude, this is Dave Comides coming in to do study
Oh,
camp.
please.
No, I'm serious because like I was actually supposed to be your second on Widows, but I ended up not.
Oh, we talked about
Yeah.
that. That's right.
But I ended
Yeah,
up not
yeah,
doing it.
Didn't happen.
And
Yeah.
then so like I was aware of both of you guys, and
Yeah.
like I was just like, yeah, these guys aren't gonna hire me. Like, why would they? And then sure enough, I got the gig, and it was just kind of like back to being terrified again, where it was just like, it's kind of like I likened it to like the Attitude, where it's just like, you become like the king of like, junior high, and you're like the 8th grader that's like good at sports and like popular, and then you go to high school and no one cares
And no
about
one
you, and
cares.
you're right at the bottom, and then you work your way back up, and you're like, oh, I'm a senior, I'm the king of the school and all the
Yeah.
sports and this and that, and then you go to college and no one cares
No,
again, and
that's-
it's like, so I felt like that going in with you guys, where it was just like, okay, I've gotten some confidence. I left Chicago Fire, like, it was like my cushy like gig that I could depend on. So like
Yeah.
I'm out in the wild now. I left
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
Bear.
right.
Once the Bear's over, like what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Like I have nothing. And then so when you guys hired me, I was definitely going in being like, okay, I gotta make sure these guys don't think I'm a joke. Cause like I did feel like I was like, they're gonna know that I'm not that good.
Well, nothing could be farther from the truth. But I do remember John called me up and he's like, "Yeah, I want you to meet this guy Gary. I hired for him for B camera." I'm like, "Okay." And I said, "Is he any good?" And he's like, "I'm not sure, but he's really nice and he seems to know what he's talking about. So we'll see if he's any good." And sure enough, we did.
That was the best I could have done.
But the reality is that's like what most people are looking for. It's like, you're either going to be good or you're not going to be good. And if you're not good, no one's
Yeah.
probably going to hire you. If
Yeah.
you hear like this person's horrible, stay away.
Yeah.
But the rest of it is just like you want someone who you can be hanging out with for
Yeah.
16 or
For
14
sure.
hours a day or whatever.
And I think that like John was such a dream to work with, and so were you. And just the fact that like I was very much like, you guys accepted me right away, but also, kind of like let me find my space with you, like my
Totally,
place with you
yeah.
guys, which was really nice. And like just kind of like slowly found like where I could operate with you guys, in the sense of like how to find shots, how to pitch shots, how to
Yeah.
help, and
Yeah.
like know when not to help.
Well, I think that was also
And-
the big thing that, because like, of course, you go in the first couple of days and you're judging everybody, right? I mean, you're
Of
doing it to
course,
everybody.
yeah.
You're going, who's this and who's this? And right off the bat, and he even recognized it. He was like, no, he knows when to pitch and he knows when not to pitch, which is a huge part of being a
Yeah.
B camera operator,
Well,
right?
and I just kind of thought, like I said, with that great advice of being an editor, it's just
That's
like,
great, yeah.
is there any shot that I could pitch? Doesn't matter if it's cool or not. Like, does it help?
Does it help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then
Yeah.
it's like I definitely don't want to go pitch that. And there were times too where early on where I would pitch him where I'd be like, I found this, but I don't think it's good. I don't think it helps.
Yeah.
And just like to tell him that I was like, I want you to know that I'm looking, but
I don't wanna
everything
bother
I
you with
found
this.
isn't any good.
Yeah. No, but it's actually, by the way, that's not a bad tip, because then it's sort of like letting them know, look, I'm not just sitting on the sidelines not doing
Yeah.
anything, but I just don't think there's anything to be had here. But
yeah.
there is this, and usually if you know what you're doing, they're going to go, yeah, it's not really worthwhile.
Yeah, and
But-
very much the politics too of just like, and especially coming from having done A camera work, it's like you don't want to step on your A camera operator's toes either. If he's got something going that is gonna be this that's gonna just tell the story and be
Yeah.
what it is, it's like then there's no reason for me to come and try to like even give them an option.
Yeah.
You know,
Because
that's how
once the
I.
editors have it,
And
it's gonna
somebody
go
once
in.
told me, or it's like I think it was actually Drew said it once, where he said it on like a low budget indie movie we did it before 8th grade, where he was like somebody wanted a shot and he just came in and he's like no, and
Yeah.
they're like, what do you mean no? And he's like, because if I shoot it, they'll use it, and I don't want them to use it.
That's absolutely right.
And I was just like,
That's what you got to think
Yeah.
about. Yeah. Is this, if you shoot it, it's in the movie, and do you want it to be in the movie? Therefore,
Yeah.
do you want to shoot it? Yeah.
And so just, and again too, like just kind of like s- when you see everybody else's process, like we have such a unique process working on the Bear,
Yeah.
and then like there was such a process working on Chicago Fire that like it was just another it was another place for me to learn where it was like, okay, here's how somebody that I greatly admire does it,
Uh-huh.
and here's like and like just how he communicates and how he runs a set and
Yeah.
how he like can really be the maestro of everything, and just being like, oh, okay, like now I get to like learn what it's like at this level, and like not that there's any level greater than every other level,
Yeah, but it's just a different way of doing things.
Yeah, and it's
you
like
take all those pieces.
so it was just kind of an eye-opening thing in that regard, where
Yeah.
it was just like, just another kind of space to learn how to hone your craft
Yeah.
kind of thing. So it was great. And John's just like super, super nice and super smart. And
Yeah. Well, there's a few people you're going to learn more from.
and I mean, and
exactly
you
what he's getting at.
definitely, like I learned so much from you, and just like, and it's true, and obviously it's why I was like I said, I was like, I'll do B camera with you any day. It sounds great.
Well, the same goes here, and I keep telling you that as your star is rising and mine is failing, so you got to hire me for B camera. But do you still? I mean, clearly, like you said when you went on with John and I, maybe, but like when you go into the Bear, are you nervous?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just more like the jitters of like just getting started and getting going, and like
Yeah.
for me, it's more about like finding the rhythm. Like
Yeah.
once you find the rhythm, all that stuff kind of goes away.
Uh-huh.
But like I think that finding like that's what I'm more nervous about. Is like I know the job will get done, and I know we can handle
Yeah,
everything, but
but
it's
just
just
can you
about
do it well and
can we
efficiently
just
and
like
whatever?
find the rhythm where
Yeah.
it's like it's like where everybody's just like got nothing but confidence about the decisions we make, and
Yeah.
how we're gonna execute, and how we're gonna tell the stories,
Yeah.
and like are we gonna change anything in terms of like or are there things that we want to stay away from this season that we did last season, or are we gonna lean into those things and
Uh-huh.
just kind of like get the bearings of like where Chris wants to take things and where Drew wants to take things, and where they've decided it's time, where they've decided we're going in prep and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And so like just kind of getting into the mix with them is really like once you
Are
find
you
that.
involved in that? Are you heavily involved in that?
I not during the prep so much. I mean, I'm
Okay.
definitely like looped in because me and Drew are close, and he definitely loops me in
Yeah,
and
okay.
keeps me informed of all that stuff. But I mean, and our key grip, Dave Wegener, and our gaffer Jeremy Long are both like just incredible with their jobs, and like
That's great.
the little three-headed monster of them and Drew is very, very efficient.
Yeah.
And they really, really know how to support Chris and give him what he wants. And I will say that, I mean, at the end of the day, like Drew's very, 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 very smart about getting in early and prepping right. And
Uh-huh.
like our set is built in a way where the entire thing is dance floor.
So
And it's
I saw that when I came in.
and it's because of him. And he knows.
By the way, why this is something that's impressive is just beyond me. The amount of time that you save by
It's-
being able to go through doorways with a dolly. And,
Yeah,
it's
and it
just
really does
ridiculous.
free us up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then it even like with butt dollies and anything you
Sure.
could want to use, and like
100%.
so like that's like just an example of like how smart those guys are about getting in early with the production designers and everybody, and like, hey, we should do this. And it was like they wanted to put like plywood down, and they're like, well, we found this vinyl stuff that looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, great. And like
Amazing.
like, and it's just kind of like making sure that like there are no impediments in our own
Well,
set.
and at the end of the day, you've just saved what, like an hour off of your day from all
Yeah.
the dance floor and the this and that and the first so many shots.
And Drew's like so smart about the way he lights, and and just like the way that like I'm kind of given the world,
That's great.
which is really nice
Yep.
and it's freeing in many ways. In other ways, it's kind of just like sometimes I will definitely catch myself trying to do too much, and that has to be the thing where like somebody will come in and be like, "Hey, you might want to just
Dial it
knock
back.
that off." Yeah. Okay, great,
But
thank
it
you.
happens to all of us.
Yeah,
You get in
yeah.
your head and
And
you meet people
so,
from the outside.
and it's just, and I don't, God knows what they're doing at that DIT cart. It's way over my head, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
It's funny
But
because when I came in and visited,
yeah, he
he
got
w-
about 2 seconds into explaining it, probably.
well, he was showing me some sort of like, I don't know, like dual ND
Oh yeah,
that
that's what they're
Ari
put.
was letting him use. And
Yeah.
I sort of smiled and listened, but I was like, yeah, you lost me at you
Well,
lost me at new equipment.
yeah. But he's so
But
knowledgeable
he's
about all
so
that
into
stuff.
it.
Oh
Yeah,
my God, and he really knows
clearly.
what he's doing, and
And the
it,
show, look, and the show looks great. So,
yeah.
you know, so let me ask you a question looking forward, and maybe this isn't a fair question. Are you at some point going to accept the fact that like you are an established operator?
Probably not.
No.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I
What would it take to actually do that?
I mean, for me, it's just more of like, there's so many of them out there that it's just like
Sure.
the idea of like, I mean, I'm just happy to be a working operator,
Yeah.
and I'm just happy to be doing something that I like. And I think it's also something that like I'm just lucky that I got the chance to fall in love with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
you're also with people that you like, and
yeah, of course. And I think that
good
that helps a
projects.
lot. And I just think that I I don't know. I mean, like like we talked about this before too. It's like being nominated is so nice, and it's such a humbling thing. And it's like you're in these like you're in these groups with people that like have been doing it for longer than I've been alive, honestly.
Yeah.
In some cases, and
Yeah.
it's just to be even included in it is insane to me. But like at the end of the day, it's just like I don't I don't think about it like that in the sense where it's just like it's more of I just I'm so lucky to be able to be in the rooms with those guys because it's just like
I feel the same way,
yeah,
believe me.
yeah, because it's just like I think part of being an established operator and being good at anything, or whatever it is just knowing that like there is somebody out there that's better than you, and if like you stop learning,
Yeah.
it's over.
Yep.
So like to me, it's just like it just unlocks resources.
Yeah.
That's really the main thing
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me
yeah,
is
yeah.
that it's like now I can just text you or text whoever and just be like, hey, we're trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
Have you ever done anything like this?
Well, it's
or
funny
whatever?
because I was out here. I was working on Dark Matter, Dark Matter, the show that Lindley and Jeff Greeley shot, and I was doing.
Which was fun to work on.
Yeah, were you out there?
I was out there, like day playing
Did you
quite a
come and
bit.
go? Okay,
Yeah, and
because I
then
came in to do second unit, and they needed a third camera on a unit, so they kept me out for a couple days or whatever, and we had to do this shot where it was like these rows of bookcases, and this guy is running, and they wanted a dolly shot, tracking with him, but and there wasn't enough time, and I said, okay, so we got to start like 6 or 7 bookcases early so we can kind of get up to
yeah,
a speed, right? Because otherwise, you're on a long lens and you only have like a half a second to see the person there, and if you're not coordinated,
yeah,
and they were like, no, it's got to start from a dead stop, and I was like, oh Jesus. And so I'm trying to figure it out and trying to figure it out, and finally I thought, you know what, I'm going to call Don Devine, who's this great operator
yeah,
that I know and you now know because he came and he wanted to meet you at the SSC Awards, and I called him up and I go, what am I missing? Like how can I do this? And he actually, thankfully, he came up with like the 3 thoughts that I had, all of which had been, no, we can't do it because of space, we can't do it because of this. And he's like, oh, well, you're not really gonna get it. I was like, oh, okay, so we're just gonna have to keep on trying it until it happens, by luck to work out. And he goes, yeah, that's pretty much it. But it was one of those things where I was like, oh yeah, now I know these operators who have vast experience that I can call and go, how would you do this? And
yeah.
which is
And
great.
it's just to have the extra set of eyes and the extra eye,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like I think so much of it too is that like I, there's no way that like I'll I'll always come up with a better idea by hearing somebody else's idea.
Well, it's bouncing.
And I don't mean it like my ideas are better like that. I just
No.
mean that like just the fact that the line of communication is open is always going to make it better.
Yeah.
And it's always going to kind of refine it, and it's always going to help you see the thing that you're like, oh,
That's
that's
exactly
why
right.
it's not working.
Yeah, and it makes you think of
And
things in a different way just because you're looking at a different light from someone else.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and like and just to hear like somebody who has gone through all like the mistakes that
Yep.
you're going through.
Don't do this. Don't do that.
And they're like, yeah. And you're like, well, I was trying this. And it's like, yeah, that's never going to
Yeah,
work.
it's never going to work.
Yeah.
We've tried that for 10 years. It never works. Don't
Yeah.
do that. Yeah. No, it's absolutely right.
And then, you know, like nowadays with the tools that are coming out, it's just like I run into that all the time where
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, we should try this. And then it's like, oh, well, then, you know, and that's another Duskinism is, you know, the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
I've amended it, but it was like, you know, you're not going to use a screwdriver when you need, you know, you're not going to use a flathead when you need a Phillips or whatever, I think is what he said.
Yeah.
But I like to say, no, you're not going to use a screwdriver when you need a chainsaw.
Yeah.
But
that's much more accurate. Yeah, that's great.
But so like that was instilled in me early too, where I feel like that's part of the reason where like just understanding the gear is so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like there's times where it's just like a guy that just knows something about like settings in a head that I don't know
Yeah.
that can come up and just be like, oh yeah, well we did this one time, and it's like, oh that's
now it does what I
thank
needed to do.
God you're here, because I would have been struggling for
Yep.
hours trying
Yep.
to figure this out.
Yeah, well, and that's the whole thing with the digital world, which is I don't think anybody's ever going to get completely knowledgeable of it the way that
Yeah.
you used to be knowledgeable of analog things.
Yeah,
'Cause
well,
they just
and
change so constantly.
well, and it is so fast, I know, and it's, you know, and I admittedly am like so lo-fi.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
It's just like I just want to know how to point the box.
Drew makes fun of me all the time. He's like, "Do you even know how to use your phone?" And I'm like, "I don't. I'm not 100% sure."
Exactly. Well, Gary, this has been great, and what a fascinating story. I'm going to leave you with my question that I leave everybody with, which is someone who's starting out in the business, someone who's maybe moving into operating, or Gary Malouf when he was younger, being talked to by Gary Malouf now. What advice do you have for succeeding?
I mean, I think the best advice I could give anybody, honestly, is just surround yourself with talented people and listen. Because at the end of the day, there's people out there that have done it longer than you and done it better, and you'll find the ones that will pass the knowledge down. And if you can, you know, find enough of them, you'll start to gain more and more knowledge. And it's like, and then I think the thing that I really learned as I went through that journey myself is that like you start off and it's easy to learn the wrong way to do things because you can see that it doesn't work. But then as you learn more and more from the great people around you, it's easier to learn the right way to do it when it's seemingly not hitting you in the face. Where like you get good enough to learn from people that are good. And like that was the thing that I think is that was like the moment for me where I was like, oh, okay, like now I can actually start getting good by just keep listening, keep learning, and just like really finally now be able to watch somebody across the room, such as yourself or such John or somebody like that, and just be like, oh, when I didn't know enough, I would have never learned this. But now I can see them working and see how they do things and really truly start putting it into practice. And it's like, I think for me, that's the best advice I could give is just that, really.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. We'll be back soon with another great episode. Don't forget to check us out on theop.io for all sorts of information on operating and storytelling. So thanks for listening and have a great day.